everybody, my name is Kara Brown. I am an urban fantasy author, and I am here to talk to you about when to fire your editor. Did y'all miss my backdrop? I totally missed my backdrop. Before I dive into this topic, I have two announcements. One for the end of the video, but one for right now. If you did not get my newsletter that I sent out earlier this week, please make sure to check all of your folders, the promotions, the updates, maybe even check spam. If you still don't have it, I hate saying this, but you're gonna have to sign up again. It came to my attention that not all of my mailing list was actually sent to me from my previous publisher, which is very vexing, but there's not much that I can do about that. I don't want to think that this was intentionally done, but at the same time, people who got the newsletter prior did not get it this time, and when I went to go check the mailing list, those emails were not there. So that's really all I can say about that. If you didn't get it, again, you're gonna have to sign up. Deepest apologies. But let's go ahead and talk about editors. Now, editors for authors are sometimes these magical creatures that will look at your manuscript, find things that are wrong, and point them out and help you fix them. Usually an editor is somebody that you work very close with. Like, these are people that you have to have very good communication skills with because you are working on a project that has your heart and soul in it. Now, unfortunately, anybody can come out and say that they're an editor when they don't actually have the qualifications to be an editor. And the big reason I'm doing this topic right now is because in the last month I have been DM'd by a couple of individuals who were having encounters with editors and they weren't really sure how to take it. And that's understandable if you're a new author or you're, just kind of branching out for the first time and you're dealing with an editor. And you got to keep in mind that when you are working with editors, it is a slightly traumatic process because they are pointing out things that you either need to change or things that are wrong with your manuscript, and sometimes that's a really hard pill to swallow. So while I do have my own experience with a questionable editor, I did actually want to branch out from my own personal experience, and I talked to a couple of my other friends who are published authors. I talked to one who is an indie author, and I actually talked to another one of my friends who is a publisher, and they all told me the red flags that they experienced that basically signaled that they had an editor that was either not qualified or not right for them. And those are basically the experiences that I'm going to share with you. Now, the number one red flag if you have a really shitty editor is when they leave mistakes in your manuscript. And I'm not talking about they didn't put a comma in the right place. I mean, like, they skipped over a whole scene of typos and just left them there. One publisher I talked to said that they had hired an editor who did work for them and they paid them, and later on they found out that a whole bunch of books that they published had a whole bunch of errors. And the way that they found out was actually a college student used one of their books in a book report and went through and made all the corrections and sent the book back to the publisher. That's really embarrassing. Another example is when they're doing the edits, they're not doing it to help enhance the work. They're rewriting your sentences because that's how they would write. And you can always tell when you're seeing that because there's a difference between making a correction to a sentence to make it clear and completely changing the author voice. Another red flag, and this is the one I actually hear a lot about, is when you're working with an editor who does not have experience writing, reading, or editing your genre. And it shows right away. One author I talked to said that he wrote basically a Space Marine story, and he had a romance author come in and edit his story, and she came back with things like, you can only have the word hatch like 4 times in the entire book. You're not allowed to use that more. But when you're on a spaceship, you're gonna go through a lot of hatches. Like, there's really no way to get around that. The easiest way to get around that particular flag is to ask for the editor's credentials. Look at their editing history, see what books that they've worked on, look at the genres. And if you write dark fantasy and you have a YA editor messing with your book, you know that there are gonna be problems. The next example actually came from Reader Digest issue that was published in March 2018. And the article that I'm referring to is called The 7 Deadly Sins of an Editor. And one of the examples of the 7 that they mentioned was forcing changes after they were rejected. And in this example, what I'm talking about is, let's say that you get your manuscript back from an editor and you look at their suggestion and you're like, no, that changes the flow, that alters the character, whatever, and you reject it. And when it goes back and the editor sends it back, they make the change again. The big issue with that is that this is not the editor's book. This is the author's book. And if the author wants to keep something, then they have the final say in everything. And forcing the author to change in accordance to what the editor thinks is right or wrong is actually crossing a boundary. It's not professional. It's not their book. They don't get to have the final say. The author does. And I really want to stress that particular point because I know that the first time you work with an editor, it can be very scary. You're talking to somebody who's supposed to be an authority on the subject, looking at your book, and it's too easy sometimes to look at what they say and then question yourself. that's really not what they're supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be working with your writing to help enhance it, not change it so that way it meets their expectations. Don't be afraid to tell your editor, I see that you made this change, but I'm not okay with it. Another red flag is when they won't actually tell you what their credentials are. If they can't tell you what books that they've worked on, then you should not work with them in general. Or if they give you a generalized statement like, yeah, I've worked on 30 books. What 30 books? Are they still published? Are they out right now? Like, what's happening? Like, I need to see what I can in order to ensure that you are a good editor for me. Now, if you are an indie author and you're looking for an editor, a red flag that you will have to pay particular attention to is going to be the rates. There is actually a website that has the general rates that all editors should be, basically basing their own rates off of. And if they're deviating from that, they need to be able to explain why to you. For example, the editor that works on Stephen King's books obviously charges a little bit more because he's, one, busy, and two, he has a lot of experience. Book Butchers also charges a little bit of money, but they're unbelievably thorough when they're going through books. And if you have somebody that's charging less, then that can also be a red flag. You need to ask why. Sometimes when editors are just starting out, they are going to have a reduced rate because they're trying to get clientele to build up their portfolio. That's okay. You can have them do the 10 sample pages and have them give you feedback based on that, so that way you know if you want to work with them or not. The very last thing I do want to point out in regards to working with an editor has to do with professionalism. Having a professional editor kind of looks like somebody who's able to talk to you with the appropriate vocabulary, they respect boundaries, and they're always able to answer inquiries within a timely manner. If you have somebody that basically waits anywhere between a week and 2 weeks or longer to actually respond to you, you're not dealing with a professional. In fact, I'm not quite sure what you're dealing with at all at that point. If there is going to be some kind of delay when it comes to your manuscript for whatever reason, an editor should contact you right away and inform you about the delay itself, what's the cause of it, and roughly when they think that they're going to be able to deliver it to you. If you have an editor who has a delay and they don't tell you anything and you have an encroaching due date, then that's a problem. And I'm only mentioning that because I've had several acquaintances of mine who have talked about working with an editor who basically ghosted on them and then reappeared like a month later with their finished manuscript. No communication is actually very negative, so do make sure that you are working with somebody that is open to having some kind of regular discussion with you while working on your manuscript if needed. Some people will say that the place where you hire your editor can be cause for a red flag, but in today's economy, people are just trying to find work wherever they can, whether it be on Fiverr, BookBaby, or Reedsy. They're just trying to basically get out there and do work. If you are going to hire an editor, make sure that you do it on a site that has a rating system so that way you can share your experience with everybody else. I would also do it on a site where if you have a very poor experience, you can request a refund. So keep that in mind. Now, I don't want this video to scare you off of actually working with an editor or getting an editor. Editors are an extremely important process for us as authors, especially because it's another set of eyes who's willing to take the time to look at your manuscript. You definitely need them as an indie author for line edits and proofreading at the very most. But at the same time, you want an individual who is qualified to actually do this work. You don't want some tween who says that they're an editor because they're really good at grammar. It takes a little bit more than that. You're looking for someone who both has experience with the various writing genres and somebody who understands publishing. The editor that I'm working on right now, who's doing the final proofread for Queen of Swords and Silence that's coming out in August, is actually very knowledgeable about publishing and about my genre in general, and we talk pretty regularly. Sometimes it's about setting up editing schedules or just talking about publishing in general, but this is a person that's very easy to talk to, and you do want to have that very good rapport with your editor because it just helps them, or rather helps both of you understand each other a little bit more, especially when you're working on a book, because books are intense. But that is pretty much everything that I have to say in regards to the red flags with an editor. Now, these are the red flags that I got mostly from other people who had a really bad experience. If you have a bad experience, I would actually like you to share it down below, please, so that way other people who come across this video will be able to kind of see the other warning signs. I really just kind of listed off the major ones, bad editor, bad professionalism, yada, yada, yada. But as long as we all know what to look for, we'll be able to avoid it a lot better, or at least call out the bullshit before it happens. So this brings me to the second announcement that I wanted to talk about, and the second announcement is that I am actually starting the crowdfunder. I mentioned a little while back, and the reason I didn't do it right away is because I was trying to figure out the best way to do the tiers, because I don't want to come out and ask for money and give you nothing in return, if that makes sense. So the way that the crowdfunder is going to go is that you can either request topics, you can basically see a fluid newsletter. So all the stuff that I usually put in the newsletter, I'm going to share just with the Patreons there, along with deleted scenes or things that I've taken out of the books just because why not? What's actually really funny is that I was watching Clay's video last night. Clay followed me, I followed him back, I watched all of his videos. He's very charismatic. In fact, you guys should watch him too. I'm just gonna link his channel down below. But he did a video last night where he's talking about to crowdfund or not to crowdfund as an author, and I just thought that was really ironic timing because I just finished doing a lot of research about crowdfunding and how the best ways to use it as an author and yada yada yada. That's pretty much it. If you were confused about anything that I talked about or you have more questions about editors, please feel free to leave a comment down below. I make an effort to actually answer any and all comments that are sent to me. One last final thing that I do want to mention is that this person has won the giveaway. I need you to DM me your address so that way I can send you my goodies. I see that this person has not looked at the newsletter yet, so hopefully they're following me on other social media, but I do want to send you your stuff, so please DM me. But that's pretty much it. I hope you all have a good weekend, and I'm going to see y'all next week.